Hello, folks. Hi, Dolores. Hi, twice since you're on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you. Hi, Steve. And hello, Kay. Glad to see you all. Uh, please share for me. I'll wait a moment for some sharing. And then I'm going to start right up. In the meantime, I'll have a little sip of some sparkling wine left over from Valentine's Day. Instead of my usual healthy red. Thank you, Steve. Okay, let's get started. Hi, Lana. How are you? I want to share a piece from The Intercept. That piece is on H.R. 1, the For the People Act. Okay, and it's by John Schwartz.
I'm trying to turn it down.
No, that's not the way you do it. You actually mute the Facebook sound itself. You just click on the screen and you'll be able to mute it, and you won't have any sound. Okay, sorry about that. This was done on February 14th. And it says, the quote for the People Act would make the U.S. a democracy. And this is a pretty good piece. It's in very good detail. Points out the very first legislation proposed by the Democratic Party majorities in both chambers, making it both H.R. 1 and S1, is the For the People Act, quote unquote, of 2021. And John Schwartz says this is appropriate because the For the People Act is plausibly the most important bill considered by Congress in decades. It would change the basic structure of U.S. politics, making it far more small d democratic. The bill makes illegal essentially all of the enfranchisement tactics perfected by the right over the past decades, then creates a new infrastructure to permanently bolster the influence of the regular people. Now, the bill's provisions, regular people is like you and me. The bill's provisions largely fall into three categories. First, it makes it far easier to vote. First, by eliminating barriers and enhancing basic outreach to citizens. Second, it makes everyone's vote count more equally, especially by reducing gerrymandering. Third, it hugely amplifies the power of small political donors, allowing them to match and possibly swamp the power of big money. He goes on, there's a popular weary American aphorism, often attributed to the anarchist Emma Goldman, although she apparently did not say it, quote, if voting could change anything, it would be made illegal, unquote. The meaning is always taken to be that voting is pointless, However, past decades of U.S. politics demonstrate that this saying is accurate, but in fact its meaning is exactly the opposite. We can gauge how much voting can change important things by the lengths to which America's conservatives have gone to make voting difficult for the wrong people. Of course, the wrong people from their point of view. The For the People Act would require states with voter ID requirements to allow people to vote without identification if they complete a sworn statement attesting that they are who they say they are. It would make it impossible for states to engage in bogus purging of voter rolls. States could no longer stop people with felony convictions from voting after they've served their time, and would be required to inform them in writing that they now can vote again. It's already terrific, right? Even with just that mentioned. The act would then create, says John Schwartz, what the U.S. has never had: a functioning modern voting infrastructure. The United States of America is almost alone in its bizarre two-step process in which citizens must register to vote and then vote. And only 2/3 of the U.S. voting age population is, in fact, actually registered. In comparable countries, voting registration is automatic. You don't have to do anything first, you just show up to vote. The For the People Act would make voter registration here near automatic too. And anyone who fell through the cracks would be able to register and vote on election day. The bill would also require states to allow a minimum of 2 weeks of early voting for a minimum of 10 hours a day. All eligible voters could vote by mail for any reason. And to ensure voters can be confident, that their elections are secure and that their votes will count, all states would be required to conduct elections via paper ballot. Thanks to Republican success at creating gerrymandered congressional districts, Democrats can win the majority of the popular congressional vote in many states, while only garnering a minority of the state seats in the House of Representatives. With the once every 10 years redistricting coming and the GOP's 2020 success in state legislatures that control redistricting, the situation is set to become even more lopsided and fundamentally unfair. If nothing changes, it's almost certain that Democrats will lose the House majority in the 2020 midterms, even if they get the most votes. The For the People Act would head this off at the pass, requiring states to create independent commissions to conduct redistricting. While it's forgotten now, Watergate was, among other things, a campaign finance scandal. The bill of particulars supporting President Richard Nixon's articles of impeachment mentioned the chair of the board of the McDonald's Corporation bribing his re-election campaign with $200,000 in return for permission to raise the price of the company's quarter-pounder cheeseburger. Shortly after Nixon's resignation, Congress passed extensive campaign finance reforms, which placed limits on contributions to campaigns as well as campaign expenditures. The Supreme Court struck down the limits on campaign expenditures in 1976. Then the Citizens United case in 2010 and related decisions made unlimited contributions possible to super PACs, as long as everyone pretended the super PACs and formal campaigns were separate and uncoordinated. The For the People Act accepts that it will be difficult to reverse these decisions for the immediate future, and addresses the problem from the opposite direction. Instead of placing limits on big money, it multiplies the power of small money. Under the bill, candidates for congressional office could opt into a system that would provide matching funds for small donations. To qualify, the candidate would need to raise $50,000 from at least 1,000 people. Take no more than 1,000 from any contributor and spend no more than 50,000 of their own money. In return, all donations to the candidate up to $200 would be matched with public funds at a ratio of 6-to-1. Thus, if you gave $10 to someone running for Congress, they would receive that plus another $60, totaling $70. The House sponsor of the For the People Act, whose Maryland Democratic Representative John Sarbanes has explained, based on his own experience and what he's witnessed of his colleagues' behavior, how this would change the core incentives for Republicans. Right now, says Sarbanes, it is only worth the candidate's time to attend a fundraising event if they will receive at least $10,000 in contributions. There's therefore no point in going to a house with 30 constituents, each ponying up $50 for a total of $1,500. Instead, they'll head to events organized by DC lobbyists who will each write big checks. But with 6-to-1 matching funds, the same constituent House party would generate $10,500, $1,500 from individuals, $9,000 from the government, also known as the people, suddenly making it worth a politician's while. That's not all, however. Sarbanes points out that from a candidate's perspective, such an event would actually be more valuable than a K Street fundraiser because attendees can vote, they can donate, they can volunteer, they can rope their friends in. You're creating an active, engaged group of people around your campaign. That can be worth 2 to 3 points. That's a difference in a close election. Now, at this point, I want to set the record straight in one respect. And that respect is that the only way to approach it is not through increasing the influence of small donors through public funds. Though I'm all for that, and I like the 6-to-1 plan. But it is also possible to cut down on what the big donors could give. It's very possible. All you have to do is pass a new campaign finance law which limits their contributions once again. Try passing a law like the one that was passed, that was declared unconstitutional in 1976, and then use Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, the exceptions clause, to prevent the Supreme Court from doing judicial review on that particular act. That will invalidate CU. It will invalidate the decision of 1976. It will invalidate all the BS the Supreme Court has been doing over the years to make it possible for large contributors to make these huge contributions to our campaigns. So the only way of doing it is not just through the For the People Act. In fact, I would suggest that what ought to be done is for the For the People's Act to also include the exceptions clause, so the Supreme Court won't be able to review and undermine the For the People's Act. The Supreme Court is not a sacred institution. It is an institution that itself has been corrupted by big money. We've seen it all. We've seen it happen since 1990. We've seen the corruption. The Supreme Court is now controlled by people who favor large corporations and favor the wealthy. It is not an unbiased body. It is not a fair body. And the Constitution gives the Congress the power to limit its capability to review certain types of acts of the Congress. Those ought to be acts that make decisions concerning what kind of campaign financing is going to be allowed in this republic. So I suggest what should be added to the For the People's Act to make it even better is the exceptions clause. So this would make it possible for candidates to spend their time with actual voters and listen to their concerns and needs to a far greater degree than they do now, says John Schwartz. But it should also have a significant effect on voters themselves. Right now, non-billionaires are well aware that their vote or $25 contribution has little impact on politicians. Why bother participating at all? But if you and each of your friends can turn $25 into a $175 contribution, a political participation is suddenly much more rational. I agree with that too, but I have to ask the question, why should it be only 6-1? Why shouldn't it be 10-1? Certainly, a rich person who can afford to give $1,000 to a campaign can do far more than I can do. Even if my contributions were multiplied by 10-1, that still would not be the equal of the rich person's contributions. Why not 10-1? Why not 25-1? What's the problem? Does John Sarbanes somehow have lurking in the back of his mind that there's a financial problem here? That if the power of small donors is actually empowered by 20-1 or 30-1, that would present a fiscal problem for the federal government? Is he limiting it to 6-1 because somewhere in the back of his mind he's thinking about fiscal responsibility or fiscal conservatism? How did he arrive at 6-1? Why is that the magic number? I agree it would greatly help the situation, but why not just dwarf contributions from rich people altogether? Why not recognize the realities of our economic life? That there's no equal playing field when it comes to campaign finance between a rich person and an ordinary middle-class person or a working-class person. No level playing field at all. Since the Supreme Court has equated money to speech, why should we not make the speech of the working class person or the middle class person the equivalent in power to the speech of the rich person? Now, I don't know what the magic number is, whether 100-1 would largely do that, or whether we need 500-1. I personally don't care. I'm raising the issue of how did he arrive at that magic number of 6-1? I grant, if it was 6-1, it would be a great improvement over the present situation. But I'm not just looking for a great improvement. I am looking to dwarf the power of the rich in campaigns, to have working class people and middle class people dwarf the power of the rich. That is what we should be looking for here. So I suggest that change too. This is especially true because the bill's matching funds would also be available for primary campaigns. This would greatly erode the safety of incumbents and give normal people many more opportunities to participate in genuinely competitive elections. Oh, I completely agree with that one. Boy, that would really create an entirely different situation in the red states, where the message could begin to get out of what would happen if the progressive politicians in that state were given the power instead of the people whose voice is amplified now by the rich and by the large corporations. The stakes. The For the People Act also includes a huge number of other positive measures. It would reform the Federal Election Commission, which is now all but toothless, letting campaigns commit obvious violations of the law. It would also lessen the power of super PACs. It would create a code of ethics for the 9 Supreme Court justices, something which, incredibly enough, has never existed in U.S. history. If the bill passes with its main provisions intact, a new era could dawn with a creative, lively, nationwide progressive movement. Conversely, those provisions would also empower authentic grassroots conservative movements, if any truly exist. Policies supported by the majority of Americans on health care, the climate crisis, taxes, by unionization, could finally become law. Millions of new people could be permanently drawn into public life because they would see in concrete ways that their involvement could change the country. Without such a law empowering democracy, it's unlikely any of that will ever happen, and the Democratic majority in the House will almost certainly be extinguished in the 2022 midterms, blocking the bill for the foreseeable future. It's difficult to believe, based on its lamentable history of squabbling and infighting, that the Democratic Party will manage to hang together and pass a significant bill that's built in their own obvious self-interest and that of the country. But stranger things have happened, such as the fact that the For the People Act has gotten this far in the first place. Well, I have to say that the For the People Act has not gotten very far. Yes, it's been introduced in both houses of Congress, and it evidently has the support of the leadership in both houses of Congress, and probably the heavy majority of the Democratic Party in both houses of Congress too. But it cannot possibly pass in the current situation. Why not? Why can't it possibly pass? Well, we will see why in just a moment. Let me share this piece by Jake Johnson from Common Dreams. GOP refusal to convict Trump is, quote, a clarion call for eliminating the filibuster, unquote, says Ro Khanna. Yep. And the article says the Democrats' failure to convince even just 10 of their Senate Republican counterparts to vote to convict Donald Trump for inciting a deadly insurrection was viewed by progressive lawmakers and activists a case in point for why the majority party must eliminate the legislative filibuster if it hopes to implement its agenda on climate, immigration, voting rights, and other key issues. This, of course, includes H.R. 1. Just 7 Republicans on Saturday joined every member of the Democratic caucus in casting guilty votes against the former president, leaving the Senate well short of the 2/3, 67 votes that were required for conviction. If Democrats could not persuade 10 of their GOP colleagues to vote to hold the former president accountable for provoking the coup attempt that left 5 people dead, progressives asked, why would they expect to convince 10 Republicans to join them in breaking the archaic filibuster that is standing in the way of crucial priorities and that requires 60 votes? The fact that we could not get even 60 senators to vote for the most obvious proposition of convicting Trump is a clarion call for eliminating the filibuster, unquote, tweeted Ro Khanna. And quote again, this time from immigrant rights activist Erica Andiola. Dear centrist Democrats, you couldn't even get 10 GOP votes to convict the guy who sent them up to kill you all. But do you think you can get them to vote on issues like immigration, climate? Come on. You have to end the filibuster and use every tool at your disposal to get things done. And quote again, people sent you all to Congress to make their lives better. They sent you to keep your promises, not to rely on the minority party, but not to rely on the party who defended a fascist with their vote today, unquote. So, as you know, Senate Democrats are attempting to use the filibuster-proof reconciliation process to pass a coronavirus relief package over the objections of the Republicans. But as you know, that procedural tool is severely limited by rules requiring all provisions to have a direct impact on the budget. That means Democrats would likely have to work through regular order to advance priorities that don't qualify under reconciliation. If Senate Democrats refuse to eliminate the filibuster, a move that would require the support of all 50 members of the Democratic caucus, plus a tie-breaking vote from the Vice President to Kamala Harris, they will effectively need 60 votes to pass legislation. And of course, that includes H.R. 1. That includes H.R. 1. If Democrats really want to win in 2022, if they want to retain control of the House and the Senate, if they want to have a chance at making the Biden presidency a success, if Biden wants to have a chance at making his presidency a success, then it's clear the Democrats have to abolish the filibuster, if only to get H.R. 1 passed and give them a fair chance to win in the elections of 2022. And Greg Sargent of the Washington Post said in a column on Saturday, after 43 of the Republicans voted to acquit Donald Trump, he wrote that, quote, Democrats must accept the full implications of the GOP's ongoing and intensifying radicalization, and they must be prepared to act upon them. Now that the vast majority of the Senate Republicans voted to acquit the former president of inciting insurrection, as we all knew they would, Democrats should immediately respond as follows. 1, pass H.R. 1 and S1 with all deliberate speed. 2, be prepared to nuke the filibuster if and when Republicans obstruct it in the Senate. And 3, Get the package into law as quickly as possible. Yes. They have those bills written. They don't have to go into committees anymore. They should be introduced into both houses of Congress as soon as possible. It's possible in the House. Well, it will be, I guess the House is in recess now too, and the Senate is also in recess, but the House will be back before the Senate. They should pass H.R. 1 straight away on getting into the House. And the Senate should get it on the first day it comes back. Schumer should introduce it on the first day, nuke the filibuster on the first day, get it passed into law on the first day, even before the relief bill. That should be put away, and it should be clear to all concerned that the 2022 elections are going to go on without most of the voter suppression and most of the finagling and most of the cheating and most of the obstructing, and without a huge advantage for big money in the 2022 congressional races. Sargent also said those are the House and Senate bills that would expand voting rights, make voting easier in numerous ways, and place limits on counter-majoritarian tactics such as voter suppression and gerrymandering, which Republicans are cheerfully escalating in numerous states. And Ari Berman, K of Mother Jones, on Saturday also called for the abolition of the filibuster, pointing out Democrats do have the votes to stop the next attack on democracy by passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is H.R. 1, and the For the People Act, which is S1, if they abolish the filibuster. And Berman points out the stakes could not be higher. He also pointed out the 57 senators who voted to convict Trump represent 76.7 million more Americans than the 43 senators who voted to acquit Trump. So, in the Senate, the margin was only 57 to 43. But in the population, that margin is more like 77 million. Not a margin of 14, a margin of 77 million. That isn't quite true, of course. But it is true from a representative point of view. During President Biden's first month in office, the Republican senators have already repeatedly shown they won't hesitate to use the filibuster to obstruct Democrats and try to get their way. And then, of course, the article points to the Mitch McConnell threat to filibuster the organizing resolution. And even though he didn't get what he wanted there, he did get statements from Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to forcefully reiterate their opposition, to eliminating the filibuster. So then you might ask, why would they vote to eliminate the filibuster in order to get H.R. 1 passed? Because the pressure will then be fully on them. Pressure from the whole party, because their refusal to vote against the filibuster will be jeopardizing the status of the party in 2022. It will be clear to everyone. It will be clear to everyone that that is what Manchin and Sinema are doing. And by the way, while Manchin and Sinema may seem very conservative to Democrats and are very conservative to Democrats, they're nowhere near as right-wing as the crazy Republicans who control West Virginia and Arizona. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema would not win Republican primaries. And if they're kicked out of the party, kicked out of the Democratic Party, they won't win Democratic primaries either. Their future depends on staying with the Democratic Party, both of them. Schumer can say, you vote with us on the filibuster, or you both lose all your committee assignments directly. We're not having the filibuster anymore. You guys make up your mind. This is not happening. We can throw you off your committee assignments. I can do it, and I will. And Joe Biden is backing me. We don't want the filibuster anymore. So get used to it. You'll still be safe because you'll be able to raise all that money from small donors. You won't even have to sell your souls to the rich donors anymore. There's a lot of things he can say to them. But the point is, he can make the case. We need you to vote for the filibuster so we can pass H.R. 1 quickly, so that we can democratize this whole thing. And there is no choice. This is a party line vote. We're holding everybody to it. If you defect, you're done in this party. And we don't even care if you go over the Republicans anyway. Because if you do join them right now, you'll be able to block what we want to do, all right. But your careers will be done, and we'll be able to run against you in both of your states as the people who torpedoed the Democratic program, who torpedoed their relief from COVID, and who torpedoed also rise in the minimum wage and a whole bunch of other good things we have planned for them. On Saturday, hours before the Senate voted to acquit Trump, the Republicans reportedly threatened to wield the filibuster against Biden's cabinet nominees and legislative agenda if Democrats followed through with calling witnesses in the impeachment trial. I guess I know this threat was made, but I don't know how it could have been made, because it is impossible to filibuster the cabinet nominees anymore. That use of the filibuster has been abolished already. So that's not possible. Now they can still filibuster the legislative agenda, part of the legislative agenda, the part that's not going through reconciliation. But I didn't consider that to be much of a threat. Anyway, guess what? They're going to block all this shit anyhow, unquote, said by Brian Beitler, editor-in-chief of Crooked Media, said in response to the Republicans' threat, quote, again, that's an argument for getting rid of the filibuster, not for agreeing to call witnesses and then immediately caving, unquote. Yeah, which is what happened. Okay, the Democrats caved on the witnesses, didn't make the full case they should have made. They really botched that up, and now the House managers are running around celebrating how much they accomplished. They did accomplish a lot. Their performance was wonderful, except for caving on the witnesses. We really needed to have those witnesses come forward, even if it took another week. And the reason why is You needed to have the full public case against Donald Trump in terms of the incitement of the riot. There's going to be a monstrous propaganda campaign that will be unleashed by Trump and his supporters to whitewash the whole incitement to riot, the whole use of violence on that particular day. We need to have a better record from witnesses, from people, about what actually went on. It also might have swung a few more votes. I don't think it would have gotten the additional 10 votes that would have been needed, but it might have gotten 5 or 6 of them. I mean, it might have gotten things all the way to 60 or 61 or 62. It might have persuaded others or made the evidence so graphic to people in their states that the pressure would have built on them to come over. Who's to say that all 43 would have stayed steady if they had seen a steady stream of witnesses, one after another, convicting Trump in one way or another? It's just too facile to say this would not have had a big effect. I think it would have. Next. There was a very good piece by Ryan Cooper dealing with the filibuster that I thought it would be good to cover. Let me get that up. How the Filibuster Poisons Politics from Top to Bottom by Ryan. That was some time ago on February 9th. The Senate filibuster, which today requires 60 votes of virtually every piece of legislation, is bad. It's a big reason why Obamacare is so stingy, why there was no climate bill in 2009, why it took 2 decades to overthrow Jim Crow, and on and on. But I didn't quite realize how really bad it was until I read Kill Switch by Adam Gentleson, who was a staffer under Senate Leader Harry Byrd. The modern filibuster is not just an obstacle to passing things through the Senate, though it is that. It is also so effective an obstacle that it has virtually ended routine governance and created a slew of toxic side effects in the process. The filibuster as it exists currently has helped centralize congressional power in a handful of party leaders, fueled corruption, and stoked a polarization of the parties. It is a blood clot at the heart of our political system. One piece of Senate arcana Gentleson explains in his book is that contrary to the popular myth of a filibuster requiring a senator to talk indefinitely, and also contrary to the commonly heard idea now that one needs 41 votes to initially execute a filibuster, today it only requires one single Senate staffer. For a variety of reasons, the Senate leadership sends out a hotline email canvassing their members' intent to filibuster a bill whenever one comes up for discussion. Quote, when you get a hotline, all you have to do is call the cloakroom, tell them the senator you work for intends to place a hold on the bill, and the bill is filibustered, unquote, writes Gentleson. In parens, Cooper says this form of the filibuster only dates back about 15 years. In other words, only till about 2005 or so. That is why today virtually every single bill is filibuster, and that is why regular order legislation basically does not happen anymore. Instead of the schoolhouse rock story where individual bills are voted on as they come up, consequential legislation now only ever passes when there is some kind of crisis, like when the government is about to run out of money or breach the debt ceiling, or there's a pandemic or something similar. Then typically Congress passes a monster 3,000-page super bill at the last second, jammed with a whole bunch of vital business and pet priorities that have built up over the preceding year or so. That's a good description of the current reality in the Congress. That in turn drastically strengthens the party leadership in Congress because they control the floor schedule and because they coordinate the party discussion about what can be included, which necessarily means disempowering committee leaders and backbenchers. There used to be niche careers in politics where someone would get elected to the House or Senate, learn the ropes of some particular issue, and make a name for themselves by working on it. Think Senator Wagner, on unions, Senator Robert Wagner during the 30s and 40s, and, on unions, or Representative Henry Waxman on environmental protection. But not much anymore, because there is no legislating through regular order. The rewards for putting in that work in either house are tiny. If you are lucky, particularly if you suck up to leadership, you might get your pet idea folded into a super bill. But that is a lot harder with everyone else trying to do the same thing. And you won't get nearly as much credit for it if you succeed. If you are not in the leadership, and there's little prospect of the average representative or senator making it that far, you basically won't ever get to wield real power. This is surely part of the reason why so many Republicans today view serving on committees as some kind of pointless nuisance, or indeed think of a seat in Congress as a route to media celebrity, though it is not the only reason. It is also part of the reason why so many up-and-coming Democrats have quit Congress to run for state office. These super bills are also a godsend for lobbyists. Excuse me a second. Because there are endless places to tuck away some corporate giveaway. Indeed, they're often so big that individual senators have little idea what is in them and wouldn't have time to read through them carefully even if they wanted to. Corruption is both easier and the punishment for enabling it is lower. Yeah, take a look at Richie Neal. After all, one can't really be faulted for voting to keep the government open or raise the debt ceiling. Finally, the filibuster stokes polarization, but partisan polarization. But filibuster defenders often argue that it enables bipartisanship. Quote, I believe very strongly in bipartisanship, unquote, says Senator Joe Manchin, as a reason he wants to preserve it. But as Gentleson argues, the reality is the opposite. When a minority can block a bill outright, there is a strong partisan incentive to refuse to bargain and cast the opponent's bill as being Hitler incarnate. But when a majority's bill is going through for sure, then there is a counter incentive for dissenters to cut a deal. Gentleson shows that is part of why so many big laws in decades past ended up passing with huge majorities, despite being quite controversial. Many of the bill's opponents saw the writing on the wall and decided to get something they wanted rather than casting a doomed no vote. By the same token, this reduces the incentive to castigate the opposition with incendiary rhetoric, because doing so would nix the chance of getting a tasty amendment passed. More broadly, I suspect these examples of bipartisan cooperation could deflate at least a little of the boiling hatred of liberals on the right. I don't know if anything will deflate that. For instance, there's recently been some discussion about the best way to help parents with the cost of raising kids. With President Biden and Representative Representative Richie Neal, a Democrat of Massachusetts, pushing an expansion of the child tax credit. However, a rather astounding alliance has emerged between leftists like Matt Brunig and conservatives like Ross Batutat and Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, who argue that a child allowance is a better approach. Under regular order, this might be hashed out in some kind of compromise fashion that got significant bipartisan support. In the process, signaling to the Republican base that Democrats are not Satanists who eat children, but because the Biden plan is part of a massive pandemic relief package going through the reconciliation process so it can sidestep the filibuster. Romney's proposal is getting zero support from other Republicans and will likely go ignored by Democrats. But the cleanest and most obvious solution here would simply be to delete the filibuster. But given that the deciding senators do not agree, it would be easy to imagine reforms that would make it much harder to use. For instance, we might require 40 senators to actually register the objection on the floor of the Senate, or introduce time limits, or bring back the old-fashioned requirement that senators speak continuously. Or we could require that any filibuster could not block a bill supported by states that represented a majority of the population. As Jettelson details, back when it was a big pain in the neck to launch a filibuster, it was still the case, that the minority parties did it a lot less. But it is simply untenable to allow this system whereby any member of any Senate staff can bottle up any normal type of legislation to be the hinge point of the entire American government. It is pointless, toxic, internationally humiliating, and again, not even a real Senate tradition. Bring back majority rule. Yes, bring back majority rule. I don't agree with making a compromise on that. Just get rid of the filibuster once and for all. Just use the nuclear option. Force Manchin and Sinema to agree. Get it done. If you want to be reelected again in 2022, get it the hell done. If you want to continue to exist as a party, get it the hell done. Next, we move to Medicare for All. Another piece, this time in The Intercept, again. This one's from February 13th, 2021. It's called The Path to Winning a Floor Vote for Medicare for All in Congress. It's by Stephanie Nakajima. There's somebody holding up a sign, "Healthcare is a human right, single payer now." That was a demonstration for Medicare for All at the Trump International Hotel and Tower in New York on January 15, 2017. So the organizers of bills for Medicare for All are now mobilizing to introduce them in the House and the Senate, pushing to win a record number of co-sponsors. Hashtag Force the Vote, a proposed tactic to force a floor vote in Congress on the health care plan, still dominates the Medicare for All organizing discussion online. Still, it's a month and a half after the failure of Force the Vote. on January 3rd. Hashtag Force the Vote originated last December when a group of online activists suggested that some of the progressive members of Congress withhold their votes for Nancy Pelosi's reelection as Speaker of the House until she agreed to put Medicare for All bill on the floor for a vote. But she was reelected, to the position in January. However, the debate didn't stop there. As an organizer, says Stephanie Nakajima, I think it's important to look for and meet on common ground with progressive allies and not to descend into an online debate club. But because hashtag Force the Vote, which was conceived primarily on Twitter and does not have the support of a single organization or union fighting for Medicare for All, has captured so much attention on the left. Unpacking some of its problems is a great way to illustrate what kind of organizing will get us closer to passing Medicare for All, and hopefully will bring us closer to a shared theory of change. What's implied by that? That the theory of change that was common to the squad and to other members of Congress and to the unions and to the movement forces that have been pushing Medicare for All for years and years and years was not common to the online community on Twitter, that they had a different theory of change, which was basically that a sufficient amount of pressure generated on Twitter by largely unrelated collectives of individuals would put so much pressure on Nancy Pelosi that I shouldn't say Nancy Pelosi, but so much pressure on the squad that they would provide an ultimatum to Nancy Pelosi of the kind that Force the Vote actually wanted them to provide. Of course, I never believed in that. I thought that maybe a Twitter campaign could persuade the squad that it would be in their interest to stop Nancy Pelosi from getting into the speakership because they could get a speaker that would be much friendly, far more friendly to them than the Nancy Pelosi would be, more friendly to them and more friendly to their bills. I still think that would have been a greater possibility than just trying to persuade them, but to provide an ultimatum to Nancy Pelosi, which didn't even really threaten her power. In other words, the assumption of the ultimatum was, if you say yes to this, we're going to put you in. And that wouldn't have meant a thing, because she would have either found some way to get out of the vote, for Medicare for All, or she would have organized to defeat it. She wouldn't have cared about that. How many times has she already stated her opposition to Medicare for All? Is there anybody who doesn't know that she's opposed to Medicare for All? So what would prevent her from organizing against it while holding the vote? It was quixotic, very quixotic, I think. It didn't analyze the actual power situation in a way to demand something that would bring enough advantage to the squad to persuade them to use their votes to replace her with somebody else. They were not providing a good argument for that, because a single ceremonial vote on Medicare for All wasn't enough of a reward for the risks they perceived they would be taking. Anyway, going on with the article. Advocates of hashtag force the vote maintain this will provide considerable pressure over and above the House co-sponsor list, a public document that already tells you who is and who isn't on the bill. Fundamentally, we disagree not on whether to hold electeds actually accountable, but how. The co-sponsor list actually holds plenty of power. It's just not being used. I bring two case studies. The first is a pressure tactic that was not ultimately effective on its own. Stephen Lynch, of Massachusetts, represents a solidly Democratic district. He was reelected with over 80% of the vote in 2020. Healthcare Now, the organization I work for, and the Boston chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America bird-dogged him on Medicare for All at a 2018 town hall and caught a great moment on video. When pressed on why he won't support the bill, he said, quote, "Your current insurance will go away," unquote, to wild applause. The clip was retweeted by People for Bernie and other popular accounts, got almost 15,000 views on Twitter, broadcasting Lynch's defiance on Medicare for All and all his right-wing talking points. Did Lynch support the bill after being exposed? Absolutely not. And if forced, he will vote against it with few repercussions. This is despite the fact that his constituents and Democrats at large are overwhelmingly Medicare for All supporters. Here's an open secret about our political process that explains how this can be. But legislators don't care if their constituents support X or Y policy. They start to care if they know you have the capacity to hold them accountable and that you intend to carry out a public pressure campaign in response. Of course, the power of constituents also competes with the pressure House members get from the healthcare industry. Of course. And at this point, I have to introduce, another point, which is to say, if we get rid of the filibuster first, and then H.R. 1 is passed, and then the redistricting proceeds according to independent commissions in each of the states, guess what? Steve Lynch won't have a district anymore where he gets reelected 80 to 20 all the time, because it's going to be a much more balanced district. It won't be a gerrymandered district. It won't be a district only full of Democrats. It'll be much more split. What will that mean? It will mean that the Democrats who overwhelmingly support a Medicare for All bill in that district will be much more influential, because their votes will be much more important to him, and because their increased financial power due to the passage of H.R. 1 would be that much more important to him as well. So just to tie together the two things we're talking about here tonight, this is very important. Lynch's constituents might support Medicare for All, but until enough of those constituents have been mobilized into a local pressure campaign, he will happily carry on taking corporate donations from the industry. So far, $427,000 just for insurers over his career, and brazenly disparaging Medicare for All. A floor vote and the co-sponsor list are both powerful in the same way, latently. To actually wield this power requires persistent and strategic local activism. It's this under-evaluation and dismissal of local accountability that leads to the analysis behind hashtag force the vote. The notion that we just need to pull harder on the same level of power that we already have through the national co-sponsor list, the adoption of this faulty analysis without significant consultation of organizing groups already working on this issue has not only led to the popularization of an ineffective tactic, but also has deepened existing misconceptions about our path to victory. Here's an example of that co-sponsor list in action. For almost all of the years that Joe Kennedy represented the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District, he was not a co-sponsor of the Medicare for All bill. But when Healthcare Now formed a local in-district coalition that brought this to the public, a very specific public, his constituents, he finally started to feel the heat. Late in the campaign, activists spent an entire month canvassing outside supermarkets in his district, informing them that Kennedy was not a co-sponsor of the bill and asking them to call his office. When we finally got the in-person meeting that led to his co-sponsorship, he shared his distress over these calls, the vast majority of which came from his district. The power of his absence on that co-sponsorship list lay dormant until activists picked it up and used it against him. We've just gotten two very good examples of what works and what doesn't. Going further, force the vote, hashtag force the vote, lit a fuse on Twitter for two reasons. First, people are frustrated with corporate Democrats and maybe even more so with our stalled progress at fighting them. After a blitz of new co-sponsors in 2017 and 2018, the collective movement for Medicare for All has made much less progress over the last couple of years. The unfortunate truth is that the next and last 114 votes, we need to hit a majority in the House, are going to be significantly harder to gain than the ones we already have, because the lawmakers are in many cases more powerful and closer to leadership and represent districts that don't have established progressive infrastructure. So there, the point, is being made that you need to establish a local infrastructure of activists and people working for Medicare for All to get those last 114 votes. Now, the next and hardest phase to win Medicare for All will require serious in-district base and coalition building and the commitment of organizations to carry through campaigns that may run for months. And most supporters understand that it's going to take more than call and email your congressperson and action. They just don't know quite what that action will be. Which brings me to the second reason hashtag force the vote took off. People are hungry to get involved in Medicare for All organizing, tagging progressive members of Congress on Twitter and demanding they pressure Pelosi was an easy action in which everyone was able to participate. It had the feeling of a mass movement. But an actual mass movement, counterintuitively, doesn't look like everyone doing the same thing. Rather, it means building power in your neighborhood, city, or state. If you're building power effectively, it will look very different in Alabama's 7th Congressional District than in California's 12th Congressional District. By the way, if I recall correctly, is Nancy Pelosi's Congressional District. You make a huge difference to the national movement by doing the kind of local organizing and coalition building work that creates deep and enduring accountability structures we can draw upon no matter who is in office. Unfortunately, instead of funneling people into the organizations that are base building locally, force the vote became a purity test that distracted from the less glamorous work of organizing and perhaps even undermined it. Rather than consolidate our efforts, Force the Vote spawned a new organization that would do a more radical Medicare for all work. Frustration that should have been directed at local Democratic parties and all the complicit institutions that uphold our for-profit healthcare system was instead turned on progressive organizers who didn't endorse this overnight sensation of a tactic. The House Speaker vote has passed. I understand by the desire to skip the Congress-wide endgame tactics. Unfortunately, when you're up against the wealthiest opposition any movement has ever faced, there are no shortcuts. But make no mistake, when we're close to victory, we're absolutely going to force the vote. So, the reason why I really like this article is because it points up what is not generally seen by Twitter users. It points up the movements that are always taking place that don't get into the news, that are in back of legislation of one kind, or another. Now, this Medicare for All movement has been going on for a long time. I remember it from 2009 and from 2010. It was there then. It was organizing then. It wasn't as strong then as it is now. If you asked people on a survey how many people were in support of Medicare for All, there wasn't that much difference between the support now and the support at that time. But what the surveys don't measure is the underlying character of the movement that is built on those opinions. The Medicare for All people have been working for 10 more years since that time. And organizations like Healthcare Now, and PNHP, and the hundreds of other organizations that are supporting Medicare for All are much better networked now and much stronger now and have much stronger support in Congress. And the support at the local level also reflects the people who elected the squad. How did the squad get in to the Congress in the first place? Got into the Congress because the squad people were supporting things like Medicare for All and getting financial support and on the ground volunteer support from organizations like the nurses and from Communication Workers of America and from other supporters of Medicare for All. Healthcare Now, activists at the local level were supporting these folks. Yes, there were Facebook groups supporting these folks too. And a lot was going on Twitter that made them popular as well, and certainly shaped opinion to some degree. But the groups that were calling the tune were these movement groups. And they're the groups that called the tune for the squad as well. They're the leaders of the movement. They're the people who, when they're ready, will be able to force the vote for Medicare for All. And by the way, they will then use their power on Twitter and will join with individuals on Twitter who want to do the relatively easy thing of building a Twitter campaign over 4 or 5 days that gets just tremendous notoriety from a popular point of view. They will join with us at that time. But if we start a campaign in which we're not actually unified with them, we can't force the vote on that. We cannot force the vote on that. Now, there's a lot of latent opposition. Well, before I go to that, before I segue to that, which is going to be the final thing, I want to say for tonight, I just want to underline, this is the best write-up that I've seen thus far that points up the reasons why force the vote was not successful in getting a floor vote, on Medicare for all. And also why, even if it had been successful in getting the floor vote, that in itself would not likely have been very successful in getting us close to Medicare for all. Because the Twitter movement was not a unified movement with the infrastructure and the underground and the local organizations needed to make a real campaign successful. Remember, what actually elected Ocasio-Cortez was not simply the Twitter support she received or the Facebook support she received. It was those on-the-ground activists working for months on her behalf, going door to door, and getting her elected. That machine, her machine, is still there. And it's there for all the other squad members too. That machine is strengthened by social media. It's strengthened by the Twitter supporters of those people. But it's not led by the Twitter supporters. They play at best a supplementary role, and they cannot get anything passed by themselves. They can't get anything close by themselves. So how do I explain the Twitter campaign that I was involved in, which is basically the one trying to persuade the squad to replace Pelosi? Why did I think that would be effective? Because our campaign wasn't meant to force the squad to do anything. We weren't giving an ultimatum to the squad. We were outlining a strategy to the squad that we thought would work and that we were trying to get them to take on. Ours was an effort at persuasion. It was not an effort at coercion. The force the vote people didn't have the power to coerce the squad to hold up Nancy Pelosi for a floor vote on Medicare for all. But if everybody had joined together in a campaign of persuasion to try to communicate to the squad that the strategy of replacing Pelosi was going to be a better strategy, maybe that would have been more successful than the original force the vote campaign would be. What about now? How about a Twitter campaign right now to get the Democrats to go hard on getting rid of the filibuster immediately, right now? We can't coerce them to do that on Twitter, but they're thinking of doing that anyway. They see the handwriting on the wall for 2022. They know they have to pass H.R. 1 and S1. That's probably why it's gotten as far as it has. Why people are talking about it. Why those bills have the support of the leadership. Because They want those bills passed. Now, I don't know whether the leadership is ready to push them immediately or not. I think they ought to push them immediately. I think there should be a Twitter campaign to try to increase the public pressure for getting rid of the filibuster, because I think there's a lot of latent support out there for getting rid of the filibuster and getting the Senate actually working again. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people probably thinking that way, knowing the Republicans are blocking things, knowing they stand in the way of COVID relief. Talk about wanting $2,000 a month checks until the COVID crisis is over. Who's standing in the way? Who are the people standing in the way? The people standing in the way are the Republicans. Who are the people forcing the Democrats to use the unwieldy reconciliation process that takes longer to get through? It's the Republicans, because they still have the filibuster, the legislative filibuster. Everybody knows the filibuster is in the way. Many, many people hate the filibuster. Maybe a Twitter campaign can mobilize that hate. Because it's also about doing the things that need to be done against Wall Street. It's also about the continuing rule of the rich. It's also about the continuing rule of the corporations. People know enough about what's going on in Washington to know that. We have a chance to use social media to build much more pressure on the elites to do what they want to do anyway, which is pass H.R. 1 and S1. I'm sure Pelosi and Schumer want to pass that, because I'm sure they want to win again in 2022. They don't want the same thing to happen to them this time around as happened during the Obama administration. And that is what they're looking at right now if they don't pass H.R. 1, and S1. So I think a Twitter campaign can help with that. That's why I've been advocating for one for days now. We got to get rid of the filibuster, and we got to get rid of it now. I will now move to your comments. So, PDA, Progressive Democrats of America. They were very much for Medicare for All during the 2009 pressure campaigns. So let's say, Steve Wolfbrand said, "May the Schwartz be with you." Yes, but the Schwartz spells his name a little differently. No T in the Schwartz. It's just an RZ at the end. Steve Wolfbrand said, "Spaceballs." Yeah, Spaceballs. And Lana says, share to Twitter. And Joanne says, hi. Kay says, hi, Joanne. Hi, Joanne. Hope you're still here. Steve Wolfbrand said, looks like most of us must be in FB jail, or maybe it's the freezing weather. Kay says, way below freezing here, Steve. I don't think it's below freezing here, is it, honey?
I don't know, because I don't have that.
Yeah, we were indoors for most of the day, so we don't know. We had a quiet day here, catching up on various kinds of stuff. Steve said, I bet it is, Kay. But many have lost power. Kay says, not here yet, fingers crossed. Kay says, Ohio is gerrymandered to hell. I know it is. Kay says the people voted in Ohio to fix the gerrymandering, but now DeWine is using the slow census report to put that off when he slowed the countdown to begin with. Yeah, DeWine is a smart and manipulative governor, Republican, of course, former member of the Bush administration. Lana said, why is any side of Congress in recess when people are waiting with bated breath for their promised funds during this crisis? Supposedly because the committee work had to be done in order to do the reconciliation bill. Of course, they just can't pass bills 51 to 50, a number of bills 51 to 50. So they have to pass one big COVID relief bill that will be, I don't know how many thousands of pages, and which is contributed to by 20 different committees in Congress. So everybody's waiting for the House committees to complete their work on the bill and contribute their little bit to the overall bill. What they're doing now is they're marking up the original bill that came from the budget committees. They're now marking up that bill on the House side. Then they're going to pass that bill. But then it's going to go to the Senate. And then we'll see. But they're in recess because they figured they had 2 weeks until the committees would finish their work. That's why. It is freezing here. It's 28. It's 28 degrees. Steve says, California as well, Kay. Okay, so Lana, you see, Joe Biden made a promise he could not keep. I won't say that he never intended to keep. But when he said that it would happen immediately, of course it could happen immediately. How could it happen immediately? Trump was still president. He was going to be president, until the 20th of January, right? So nothing would be done with Trump in the White House. I mean, everyone knew that. Also, Democrats, even though they took over the House quickly, they could not take over the Senate quickly because the Senate doesn't work that way. There had to be an organizing resolution, right? So they had to wait for the 2 Georgia senators to take their seats. So nothing could be done until the Georgia senators were sworn in, right? Then the impeachment, well, of course, it wasn't known on the 5th that it was necessary for a second impeachment to take place. But of course, when that became apparent, I guess it wasn't apparent to Biden on January 4th, and January 5th. But still, it still wouldn't have been immediate. In the best possible scenario, it probably would have taken a month from January 4th to actually get a bill through with the promised funds. One may say, well, that's immediate for Washington, and there's a point there. But when he said immediate, Biden made a promise he couldn't keep. Steve Wolfman said, California as well, Kay. Why can't districts have to be rectangular, I wonder? I don't know whether rectangular helps. Simply because I'm just not sure that one can divide up the state of California into even rectangles. They also have to equalize the population or come close to equalizing the population anyway. In other words, each of the representatives should be representing roughly the same amount of people. Some attempt is made, to do that. Says, I know GOP can't win if they don't get to pick their own voters. That's absolutely true. They got to pick their voters. Says, Steve, you should see the district that's Jim Jordan's. Holy cow. Well, there was a district here when Jennifer Wexton was first elected. Her district for that election in 2018 stretched from Tyson's Corner, just a little thin line going up by Route 7 was her district. Then it suddenly expanded, when it came to Reston, to include Reston. But then it went out to Loudoun County as far as Leesburg. And beyond Leesburg, it was just an incredibly, ridiculously drawn district. I think it's still drawn that way. Steve Wolfbrand says, I plan to register with the People's Party. And Bonnie already has registered with the People's Party. And Kay says, I doubt, no, you haven't had the opportunity to register with the People's Party yet, honey.
Why?
In order to register with the People's Party, you have to register when the People's Party actually has a ballot line here in Virginia, and you have to have to formally register for them.
Okay.
At that point. Kay says, I doubt they will get into Ohio's ballot. Carmen says, just saying hello, I'm on the city bus trying to make it home. I'm not going to listen right now because Miami's not a place you want to have your head down and hearing blocked. Yeah. And she says, hugs. So Lana says, did any Democrats vote no on impeachment? No, they all voted yes on impeachment. All Democrats. And Dolores says, Florida is also gerrymandered to hell. Kay says, is it by Dolores? Dolores says, extremely gerrymandered. Steve Wolfbrand says, DWS. Yeah, DWS has, I think, a highly gerrymandered district. Kay says, my daughter is about over living in Florida, but she is sick. Can't afford to get out right now. Dolores says, Republican rule has destroyed Florida. And yet it keeps on voting Republican anyway. Kay says, I know that. I used to go visit a friend there in the 70s when it was a Dem state. I think maybe H.R. 1 would have a great effect on Florida. It would make it a much more Democratic state. And Dolores says, even if the governor were a Democrat, both House and Senate is extremely right-wing Republican. The districts are gerrymandered. Kay says, well, of course, that wouldn't change if S1 and H.R. 1 were passed because they don't influence the redistricting inside of states. It would just take the congressional districts out of the hands of the states. Not out of their hands, but they'd have to appoint independent commissions or in order to do the redistricting. So Kay says, so is North Carolina now? Shake my head. North Carolina was so cool when it was a blue state too. Now, H.R. 1 would definitely fix North Carolina pretty good because North Carolina is very close to being a purple state now. And I think, in fact, okay, I think Cunningham, okay, whatever his name was, would have won there if not for the sex scandal, don't you think? And Dolores says, it's truly sad how Republicans destroy everything. Okay, says, tell me I live in Ohio. And Steve Wolfrand says, Jimmy Dore started Forced to Vote. I love Jimmy. Well, I love Jimmy too. He says a lot of great things, but you have to recognize his limits in terms of his understanding of what actually goes into movement politics. He thinks the whole thing is by communications, and he thinks basically that's what it takes, okay, that it's alternative media, that it's only alternative media. He doesn't know what Stephanie Nakashima knows. Bonnie says, can lobbyists who write bills be forced to limit bills written for no more than 25 to 50 pages is to speed up information to voters? Well, technically, the lobbyists do not write up the bills. In other words, technically what they do is they give documents to Congress people who write up the bills. Can there be laws that force the Congress people but to limit the size of their bills? Well,
Some been 500 pages.
500-page bills are not that much of a problem. The problem is the 2,000 to 3,000-page bills, which have become common. Those are the problems. However, one of the effects of H.R. 1, okay, and is H.R. 1, okay, and S1 are that because of the effects it would have on the lobby structure, okay, and on the influence of the donors, and because of the breakdown of the polarization, and because of getting rid of the filibuster first, it would have the effect of allowing many, many bills targeted at particular issues to have a chance, okay, of passing. So we go back far more to the old system where there were plenty of specific bills that were.
Would it speed things up?
Yes, it would speed things up, and it would be much less of an all or nothing game. But for example, take the Jayapal Medicare for All bill. That's only a 130-page bill. It's very comprehensive. There wouldn't be many bills that would be going over that size if we had this change in the political system, fostered by getting rid of H.R. Getting rid of the filibuster, and then passing H.R. 1, okay, and S1. Kay says, good question, Barney Firestone. Steve says, if they did that, Barney, they couldn't hide their corruption. Barney says, yes, that is right. Steve says, I'm afraid H.R. 1 is a snowball's chance in hell. I was going to say Texas, but, well, Steve, the only reason why it has a snowball's chance in hell is because of the filibuster. If we got rid of the filibuster, it would have a pretty good chance of passing then. Kay says sad, but probably true, Steve. Kay says PDA supports it and runs weekly meetings on it. Steve's a floor vote in Medicare for All at least forced everyone to show their hand. It was never expected to win outright. I'm not claiming it was expected to win outright. Okay. What I'm saying is that we have a pretty good read on what would happen, as Nakajima contended, from the co-sponsorships. At least the movement people believe that the co-sponsorships, okay, are a pretty good read. Now, there was something like 119 co-sponsors. Okay, I think that's the figure, okay, for the Medicare for All bill. So the question is getting close to 100 more votes. What essentially the movement people were saying was, if it got only 119 votes, that would represent a big defeat before Medicare for All. Yeah, it would force everyone to show their hand, but basically the result wouldn't be much different from the result we're seeing now, that 119 for Medicare for All bill and the others, okay, are not. So, anyway, the point is, you couldn't get a floor vote because a floor vote didn't deliver a sufficient amount, okay, of benefit for the progressive lawmakers that you are trying to get to force Nancy Pelosi to give the floor vote. I'm going to say rather strongly here, I think that Jimmy and the others who allied with him were very foolish to try to give Pelosi, okay, an ultimatum. You don't give Pelosi that kind, okay, of ultimatum if you have the votes, okay, to remove her. If you have the votes to remove her, what you do is chop off the head of the snake. That's what you do. They didn't want to do that. There were other political considerations. They said there was no one to replace her at this point. Ocasio-Cortez actually said that. We didn't think we had a good person, okay, to replace her. Now, it seemed to me they were wrong. That's why the group that I was with was trying to run a persuasion campaign on them, to try to persuade them that there were many possible alternatives that would have been more friendly to the progressives than continuing on, okay, with Nancy Pelosi. We did not succeed in persuading her. I'm not saying her. I didn't mean her. What I meant, okay, was the progressives. We were not successful in actually persuading them. We might have been if we had all the support that Jimmy Dore had for his ill-considered effort. If Jimmy Dore had been smarter and his strategy had been smarter, he might have mobilized enough support to get rid, okay, of Nancy Pelosi and get in somebody like I don't know, there were literally 5 or 6 other people. One person I thought that would have been a real good alternative, especially if you wanted a Medicare for All bill to pass, would have been Debbie Dingell. she would have fought like hell for Medicare for all. If you had replaced Pelosi with her, that would have been a big advance for Medicare for all. Kay says Progressive Dems of America. That's what the PDA stands for. Steve says, I joined the DSA, but not really active much. Kay says, Steve and I usually share their Sunday afternoon meetings. Check it out. Steve says, tag me. And Steve says, I get my first Pfizer shot on Thursday. Can't wait. Well, good luck, Steve. I hope there are no side effects. We are now done with our vaccines for the time being anyway. Kay says, I want the J&J one-shot one. Steve says, $2,000 is not $1,400. I don't give a fuck, no effing way. I agree. So Biden is breaking his promise in that way too. Steve says J&J is not quite as effective, but it will do at this point. Kay says it's one shot and it has kept people from hospital and death, including the variants. Yeah, that's what I read. And by the way, they're also now running tests on how effective it gets when they give a booster shot. So it might be that a booster shot, but it's certainly very effective as a single shot. And there also might be a possibility of getting a booster shot at some later time. Steve says, I'm missing Carmen tonight. Yeah, me too. And Evelina, Kay says Evelina's missing tonight too. Kay says, I've talked to Evelina a couple of times today. She's going through some stuff. Oh, I hope it's not bad. Steve says, Jimmy is a Jagoff comedian working out of his garage. His range is vast, though, sometimes 12 or 14,000 views watching, kind of like Joe Rogan, a real human being. It shines through. I agree. All that shines through. But that doesn't mean that he knows what he's talking about when he tries political strategy. I don't think he did. Steve Wolfman says, I hope she's okay. Kay says she is okay, has some sadness right now. Steve Wolfman says, bummer. Kay says, yes, it is. Steve Wolfman says, we never know what other people are going through. Absolutely right, Steve. We never do. Kay says, exactly. I'm glad she feels that she can talk to me. So am I, Kay. It's a good thing that she feels she can talk to you. Okay, folks, I think we're at an end. Hope you liked this. It was close to my heart. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow night with more stuff. Thanks for coming.